on BBC4. Newsnight now on BBC Two with Emily Maitlis.
Tonight, talking Tory. What direction will Theresa May's election manifesto take her party in? We've heard so little of her plans on spending, defence, austerity and foreign aid. What goes, what stays? We talk to those who knew the last manifesto inside out. And to the Tory leader in Scotland, Ruth Davidson.
The Scottish Conservatives always put the union first, and that's what people know, and that's why, whether you're a tactical voter, and I'm not necessarily somebody that expounds that, but if you're a principal voter, your vote, if you don't want the SNP, if you don't want to encourage their tunnel vision to break up Britain, is to vote for the Scottish Conservatives.
What do you do if you're a Labour voting Brexiteer who likes this government's direction of travel? We're in Greater Manchester.
Obviously a non-Tory area as we are, we ain't going to vote for those. But what else have we got in front of us?
And how do Lib Dems claw back the South West that went so heavily for Brexit? Hello, good evening. Just 2 years ago this month, David Cameron's Conservative manifesto was promising a brighter, more secure future. An irony presumably not lost on the former PM politically or personally. But now it's Theresa May's turn. What will she choose to promise the nation? Brexit determined her reign. Brexit has dominated it so far. But what about all the other stuff that decides how we vote? Spending plans, schools, foreign aid and defence. What will she set out to achieve, and what may trip her up in the quest for more control? Our political editor, Nick Watt, has been having a look, and he's with us now. Nick, let's just focus first of all on that question of aid. What have you been hearing?
Well, there's something of a battle going on at senior levels of the Conservative Party over that 0.7% pledge. That's 0.7% of gross national income that should be spent on overseas aid. There are senior figures who are saying that should be rolled in with the 3% of GDP that is spent on defence, the much smaller amount that is spent on international trade, and that should create an overarching security budget that would come to around 3% of GDP. Now, that would run into trouble potentially with the official development assistance rules which govern what you can define as international aid spending.
So what kind of resistance is she getting on this?
Well, I think it's fair to say that the International Development Secretary, Priti Patel, will be keen to keep that ring-fenced budget. She believes that it obviously benefits developing countries, but it also has a benefit to the UK because it helps to create a much more stable and safer world. But also its defenders believe they have some powerful arguments, some of which are being heard sympathetically at senior levels. In the first place, there's a feeling that would you potentially be sending a signal that the UK at the time of Brexit is stepping back from the wider world? That's being heard sympathetically. And the second one is the biggest threat to the Conservatives in this general election will be from the Liberal Democrats. Do you want to be handing them a gift? So look, with all these issues in mind, we thought today we would look at the approach that Theresa May adopt in those non-Brexit issues. The architects of David Cameron's modernisation project always feared it could go up in a puff of smoke. Their nemesis Theresa May now has a chance to remodel the Conservative offer for the people she wants to champion, ordinary working families. Her election manifesto will give the Prime Minister the opportunity to junk, amend, or perhaps build on some of David Cameron's signature themes. One of his former advisers hopes she seizes her chance.
She has this opportunity to reset the whole social settlement of our country, and with an opposition in such disarray, the way is right open for her to introduce some really radical reforms. I think we're at a 1945 moment. You know, there's this huge international event happening, but behind the scenes, in 1945, they were preparing for the welfare state. I'd like to see Theresa May be the Clem Attlee of our times.
Behind the scenes at Westminster, there's something of a classic pre-manifesto battle going on, as ministers seek to promote cherished ideas and, in some cases, to grab territory from rival colleagues. There is the sound of sniping in the air. Newsnight understands that there's a push in Whitehall to change David Cameron's landmark commitment to spend 0.7% of gross national income on overseas aid. There are calls to bundle this up with defence spending into one overarching budget, a move that is being resisted by the International Development Secretary.
To have the operation in terms of food distribution.
Priti Patel has a reputation as a right-wing aid sceptic, but she believes the ring-fenced aid budget delivers enormous benefits to developing countries.
That is the risk that you lose, if you remove that target, you lose all the goodwill that comes from a significant amount of the population that does actually believe in our overseas aid spending. But we also recognise, and one of the ways we justify our overseas aid spending is it is part of our diplomatic effort, it's part of our soft power, and it is also part of our defence, because if we help poor countries and developing nations to grow and prosper economically, then we can trade with them and partner with them.
One of the most expensive commitments made by David Cameron was the so-called pension triple lock, the pledge that the state pension rises by at least 2.5% or inflation or average earnings if they are higher. Newsnight understands that ministers are taking a hard look at this commitment. No decisions have been taken.
I don't think it's sustainable for long, and it's had its effect. We've seen pensioner poverty falling. Pensioner incomes are now higher than disposable incomes for working age families. So I think the work of the triple lock is coming to an end, and we do need to rebalance the fiscal settlement towards younger people. We need to cut costs overall, I'm afraid, still, painful as that is. But where there is public spending changes to be made, I'd like to see a greater investment in younger people, and that will ultimately bring the costs down in the future. So I think there is an unfairness in the current settlement, and we do need to rebalance a little.
David Cameron unleashed a schools revolution with the creation of a new generation of free schools. But there was one line he never crossed: selection by academic ability. Theresa May will put her plans for grammar schools in the manifesto. But Newsnight understands this will be modest. The Prime Minister foresees the creation of around just 20 new grammars. A wounded Philip Hammond will adopt a highly cautious approach as he tries to stabilise the public finances. Newsnight understands that under current thinking, the manifesto will avoid making major commitments on the big-ticket item of social care ahead of the publication of a green paper later this year.
This government isn't going to make a dramatic breach with the last one in terms of the overall spending envelope. The fact is we still have a significant budget deficit. We still have a national debt that needs to be paid down. And the right thing to do for the long term, for the next generation, for the people who are going to be growing up after Brexit, is to get our national accounts into balance.
The curtain finally fell on the Cameron project today when George Osborne announced he would take his leave of Parliament. The baton has passed to an older and very different generation of Conservatives.
Nick, what? Lots to chew over there. So how far from the Cameron manifesto is May likely to move? Camilla Cavendish was head of policy for David Cameron, made a live peer when he left. Andrew Mitchell was the International Development Secretary in his cabinet. It's lovely to have you both here. Let's go through them roughly in the order that Nick took us through then. This 0.7%, which has been so strongly ring-fenced, and you'll remember it well, is that under threat? Should it be negotiable now?
Well, I hope not, and I don't think so. It wasn't, of course, David Cameron who first committed the Conservative Party to the 0.7. It was Michael Howard when he was leader, not exactly a limp-wristed lefty. So it is a core promise of the Conservative Party, and I very much hope that it will be retained. Of course, it is also the law of the land now. We pass it into legislation to try and take it out of party politics.
But it could just be bundled, couldn't it? It could remain the same, and that would be...
Yeah.
Well, it can't, actually, because it's not only the money, it's also the rules under which it is spent, and the pooled funds on defence, diplomacy and development. Within that ring fence, there is another ring fence which protects the development budget. If you remove the rules, it will be plundered by stronger departments, so the rules won't be removed.
Like there's a lot of fences going on here. Can you get through this one?
My experience is that that's exactly what happens. It is under threat, Andrew, as you know, because the UK is the second largest aid donor in the world. A lot of people feel that's too much. I was an aid worker many years ago myself. You and I both know when you're trying to go into very, very poor countries and deal with sometimes very corrupt governments, some of that money is wasted. I mean, that's just a fact. There's a decision to be made about whether we want to continue at this level or not. But I actually think they may go for trying to redefine the rules, because if you had a bit more flexibility in the rules, you would be able to use it in a different way, have the military, for example, offering humanitarian assistance. There's an awful lot, as Andrew said, I mean, there are so many ring fences within ring fences. It's actually very frustrating for government in terms of meeting the objectives.
Well, first of all, you can use the military for delivering humanitarian aid, and it comes off the DFID budget. But we need to be very clear about this. The rules are set by the OECD. You've got to persuade 33 countries to change those rules,
and it isn't
going to happen.
High? I mean, you speak from experience in the field, and you've worked right inside Number 10. Does it feel to you like that it is time
I have always been concerned that it is too high. And I'm concerned now when we are still running a deficit, and because of Brexit, I mean, we have a Conservative government that is no longer committed to producing a surplus by the end of 2020, which obviously the Cameron-Osborne government was committed to, rightly, because we don't know what economic perils lie ahead. So I am concerned it's too high.
It would be popular, wouldn't it, for the country if she cut this, at least within your party?
Well, we promised, and it's now the law of the land, that we would spend what is a relatively small amount of public expenditure on helping the poorest and most needy people in the world. And I think that's very much in tune with the instinct of Britain. And I would be very surprised in a general election if we were to go back on our word, which we gave, that we would allocate 0.7% of gross national income for helping the neediest.
The bigger question
has to be outward looking at this point.
This is the bigger question, is you've got to roll everything together and say, what this manifesto must not be is inward-looking Little England. So on that basis, I think there is a strong argument for retaining the 0.7%. But on any kind of absolute financial basis, I'm afraid it should be looked at
around
again.
by tabloid newspaper bosses.
Well,
Do you think she's
I think it's an extraordinary contrast that around the world Britain is lauded and deeply respected for the lives we are changing, the millions of lives we are saving as a result of this budget. And yet in Britain, you know, it receives very hostile treatment from elements within the press.
It's about what we achieve. It's not about a set figure.
Of course
it is never about the
But you have to have a budget. Of course it's about what you achieve. And the way in which in the coalition government refashioned development was to ensure that we focused on results that this money is achieving,
and not
on the money.
Was an improvement.
I want to take us on to a couple of the other places. For example, the grammar schools, such a big hoo-ha about that at the time, and now, as Nick reports, it comes down to, 20 new grammars.
Yes.
What does that say to you then? She's rowing back, or she wants to do it, but
that's where she started. If you read the small print, when she first announced this, it was always going to be about 20 schools. She's treading very carefully. It's something she obviously feels absolutely passionately about. She was a grammar school girl herself. She believes in this very small experiment, which is, I think, a signal to the Tory rank and file and people who would like to see more selective education.
Yes.
I actually think there's a much bigger issue, if I may just put in,
Sure.
Emily, which is technical education. If she really cares about managing, she's talked a lot about that quite rightly, I think we need to look much more closely at what we're investing in technical education and perhaps move some of the money away from universities and towards vocation.
There is a perception that it is a more old-fashioned kind of conservatism that she's going for here. Not progressive so much, but something that reminds people of the good things of the past.
I don't agree with that. I think that Nick's report mentioning the 20 schools sounds about right. I remember that during the 5 years of John Major's government after the 92 election, we had a policy of a grammar school in every town, and not one was built or opened in that time. So 20 is a modest start, but I think it's the right way to implement this policy.
All right, what about triple lock? Have pensioners had their heyday now? Is it going to get harder?
I think triple lock is almost certain to go. The only question is what it will be replaced with. And the easiest thing would be to go to what they call double lock, which simply means you would index to inflation, which is a very safe thing to do politically because interest rates are low, inflation's low.
Does that actually mean they end up with less money?
Well, not in the short term, which is the political calculation. Now, in the long term, yes, absolutely, and older voters are the core of the Conservative Party, which is why there was a great deal of worry about this. But I think what we've basically seen younger people unable to get on the housing ladder, having to pay for university, having to take on all sorts of debts, which older people
priorities have to shift.
So I think it's what Danny Kruger said in the report. It has had the impact we wanted it to have. And now intergenerational equity means that we need to to change it and focus particularly, I think, on issues where the younger generation have lost out, which housing is probably the most significant one.
Thank you both very much indeed. Thank you. Thanks for coming in. Well, there's already a sense of déjà vu in elements of this election campaign. Yesterday, Theresa May warned about the prospect of a Labour government propped up by the Scottish National Party, a rerun of David Cameron's warning in 2015 that some called scaremongering. Today, Nicola Sturgeon declared she would not rule out what she preferred to call a progressive alliance with Greens, Lib Dems and Labour in government, all the parties banding together to defeat the Tories.
Let me say this very clear and straightforwardly. If the parliamentary arithmetic lent itself to the SNP being part of a progressive alliance that would keep the Tories out of government, then the SNP would seek to be part of that, as we said in 2015.
Nicola Sturgeon, well, one of the Tories' biggest beasts is their leader in Scotland, Ruth Davidson. She was also one of the most vocal opponents to Brexit last year. I spoke to her just before we came on air, began by asking her why she thought the pro-union voters who are supportive of other parties should vote Conservative.
The Scottish Conservatives always put the union first, and that's what people know, and that's why, whether you're a tactical voter, I'm not necessarily somebody that expounds that, but if you're a principal voter, your vote, if you don't want the SNP, if you don't want to encourage their tunnel vision to break up Britain, is to vote for the Scottish Conservatives. And you've seen only today Nicola Sturgeon saying she'd happily get into bed with Jeremy Corbyn, prop him up, make him Prime Minister. And I know why, because Jeremy Corbyn doesn't care about the union. During the independence referendum campaign, he didn't come to Scotland once. When he was last in Scotland, just a few weeks ago, he said that, he was absolutely fine with there being another independence referendum. So if you do care about the United Kingdom in Scotland, you know that your vote should be for the Scottish Conservatives, tactical or not.
You were one of the most admired, the most vocal, visible faces and voices of the Remain campaign. The Wembley debate people will remember. It must kill you now to have to go out and sell a message of hard Brexit to Scotland.
Well, this isn't about hard Brexit. And if you look at what the Prime Minister said in her Lancaster House speech, a lot of the things that she was talking about had actually been asked for from the Scottish Government, who are, the hardest of hardest Remainers. So things like workers' rights, things like closer cooperation on security, things like free trade. Now, there was something she said.
Actually, I remember her threatening about cooperation on security if it didn't work.
Well, there is clearly a huge amount that we put into that. But the one thing that the Prime Minister did say, and I'm quite sure this did get right up Nicola Sturgeon's nose, was that she wants the country to come out of Brexit more unified. Now, I'm pretty sure as a nationalist she doesn't want that. But let's also say this, Emily. In Scotland, whether you voted Leave or Remain, and the same as the rest of the UK, there is an understanding that the United Kingdom will be leaving the European Union, and we want someone that can get the best deal for us as we go, because that will benefit people in Scotland as well as the rest of the UK. And I tell you something, at this general election, the choice is to have which Prime Minister sitting across the table from 27 other political leaders. Do you want Theresa May with a strong hand, with a clear plan, or do you want Jeremy Corbyn, who the vast majority of his party don't even think he's fit to lead the Labour Party, never mind lead the country?
The market seemed to conclude that yesterday's announcement would herald a softer Brexit. Did you hear that? Do you think that's what it's about?
Well, look, I'm not entirely sure that the markets are the best arbiter of this. But what I do believe is that a Prime Minister with a stronger majority in the House of Commons has the freedom of movement to be able to make decisions in the benefit of the whole country.
You say freedom of movement. Amber Rudd talked about more compromise with the EU as a result of a larger majority. Is that what this is about?
I think it gives the Prime Minister space to make long-term decisions in the benefit of our country, the whole country. And I think it also means that it's not having one or two small caucuses, however organised they are in the House of Commons, being able to derail the process because the majority in there is so slim. So I would encourage people at home who want to give the Prime Minister every latitude to be able to be strong in those negotiations, to sit across from 27 other countries, to fight Britain's corner, to give her the strength that she needs. Because otherwise, it's Jeremy Corbyn that's going to be sitting there, and I wouldn't trust him to run a bath.
There's quite a live debate going on now about certain Tory policies, like, for example, the commitment of 0.7% to aid. Does that need to be guaranteed? Can you go out and sell any change to Scotland?
Well, I'm absolutely committed to the aid target. I think that international aid not only benefits...
0.7% for you?
Not even the countries that receive it, will benefit from it, but we benefit too. And the Prime Minister was in East Kilbride at DFID's headquarters in Scotland, giving her commitment to that not 3 weeks ago.
You know that there's talk of bundling it somehow, putting it with trade, putting it with defence, making it a bigger sum, maybe 3%, but as a bundle. Would that work?
Well, look, I want to make sure that we do the best work abroad. Now, I think that we have a commitment to 0.7% in aid. I think it takes moral courage to be one of the leading countries that espouses that, when there's a lot of countries that don't do it, that are coming up. So Germany's going to make it at the next round. They've come up from, I think, about 4.5.
So moral cowardice to try and dilute that, presumably.
Well, and also, there would have to be a legal process, because, as you know, it was enshrined in law at the Parliament. But there are a lot of people, not just within the Conservative Party, but right across the political spectrum, that show that, particularly at this time, as we are leaving the European Union, we want to show that we're good global citizens, that we're not inward-looking, that we're not building, we're not pulling up a drawbridge, we're getting out there into the world. And I think maintaining that commitment shows our commitment to the rest of the world.
Let me just ask you briefly, the SNP were told now is not the time when they asked for a second referendum. Just talk us through when the time is then.
Well, the Prime Minister's put this on 2 points of principle, and she's absolutely right to. One, you cannot revisit this question about the constitutional future of Scotland when people in Scotland don't know what Brexit is going to look like. So they don't know
when would
what
that
independent...
be?
Well, you've got to be able to see, one, what the Brexit deal is that's coming out of Brussels, that is brought back to the UK, and also all the attendant powers that are passed on from there. And the second principle as well...
So does that mean in 2 years, or does it mean...
Please
I'm
let
just
me
trying to get a
this.
sense,
No,
though,
I
how long
understand,
that
and we can come back to this. But the second principle is important too, and it's very important for a rest of the UK audience. When all they hear of Scottish accents are people from the SNP espousing a nationalist vision. The second part of the principle is also that the people of Scotland don't want to revisit this question. They've been asked time and time again, poll after poll. They don't want it.
I'm just interested in the timing.
Drag people back to a decision
I'm just interested
that was
in the timing,
already made when there's no public political will for it.
But she said now is not the time, and you've said we need the Brexit negotiations to take place and people to understand the process.
People need to see what it looks like.
So is that process 2 years? Is it till 2019? Is it the years after that? I'm trying to work out when would it be the time?
Well, it's when we see what the Brexit deal looks like and how those attendant powers, some of which are going to go to the Welsh Assembly, to Northern Ireland, to Scotland, come back to...
So it'd be crazy to rule it out for the whole Parliament, is that right?
Well, it's not being pinned at all to a date. That's the whole point. Nicola Sturgeon wants to pin it to a date because she's desperate to push this through on a political issue. The Prime Minister is talking about a point of principle. So the people of Scotland have to know what they're being asked to vote on. And they've also got to want to be dragged back to what was a very divisive vote in Scotland. And people in Scotland don't want dragged back there. They were promised that if they did their democratic duty, it would last for a generation. And now Nicola Sturgeon's going back on that.
Ruth Davidson, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, the Brexit vote, we know, has thrown party loyalties wide open. One of the hardest tasks for the electorate this time round will be working out which allegiance comes first. Many Labour heartlands of the north emerged as Brexit strongholds. So does that mean they'll swing behind the Tories this time round, or stick with what they know, or stay home? David Grossman is in Manchester to ask them.
Seats that were once known as simply Labour or Conservative now have an extra and, who knows, perhaps overriding designation, whether they voted for Brexit or not. This creates a challenge for all the parties, no doubt, none more so than for Labour.
Labour's problem is that it has to try to hang on to seats like this, Manchester-Withington, where voters opted overwhelmingly to remain in the EU, at the same time as trying to pick up votes in places like this, Pendle in Lancashire, where the electorate opted to leave the EU. Because a message that plays well in a place like this is likely to turn voters off in places like this. It's almost as if Labour needs to be two parties.
In our first past the post electoral system, in order to win an electoral majority, they have to put together a coalition that includes older, socially conservative, blue-collar voters, the kind of voters who voted for Brexit, the kind of voters who are not very keen on Jeremy Corbyn, with younger, ethnically diverse, socially liberal university graduates, the so-called metropolitan liberal elites who dominate in places like London and Manchester, where Labour do very well, and dominate the Labour Party activist space. They need both of those groups to win. And the problem is what those two groups want are now polar opposites.
If we look at the constituencies that voted either most strongly for Brexit or against Brexit, well, projections suggest that, setting Scotland aside, 16 of the top 20 most Remain voting seats are held by Labour, whilst 12 of the top 20 most Leave voting seats are also held by Labour. In Manchester Withington, Remain voters like Ben and Jess say they feel they have little choice in this election. They don't want to vote Lib Dem, they say, just because the party opposes Brexit. And as for Labour...
Is Jeremy Corbyn a potential Prime Minister for you?
Certainly not, no. And it's not anything personal against him. I quite like somebody that stands for the values and stuff, but I think his kind of conduct through Brexit and stuff was a little bit disappointing. He never really said what he stood for, never showed any great leadership, and I think having personal values and things is one thing, but you've got to show that you're capable of delivering something beneficial for people as a result of those, and I'm not really convinced he's ever showed any leadership ability.
It's a shame because I think locally there's a lot of support for Labour. I support Labour locally as well, but on a national scale, I think it just looks like a slightly poor effort.
About 35 miles north of Manchester is the seat of Pendle, currently Conservative but previously Labour, and one of the seats the party has to win if it wants to be in government. Amongst its mainly Brexit voting residents, I could find little enthusiasm for the current Labour Party.
Do you think Jeremy Corbyn has anything to say that will attract sort of traditional Labour voters who voted for Brexit? Do you think they will? Because lots of voters around here voted for Brexit.
Did. Yeah, he did. Yeah, they did. I don't think Jeremy Corbyn will actually, no.
Why not?
I don't think strong enough leadership. I don't know the reason really, but I just feel that there's a lot of disillusionment at the moment with the Labour Party, even in the strongholds of the north.
Really? Can you say why? What is it?
I don't know. Perhaps maybe that people are sick of the same. But at the moment, we don't feel that we've got an alternative here. And obviously, a non-Tory area as we are, we ain't going to vote for those. But what else have we got in front of us?
In a sense, the seeds of this problem were sown by Tony Blair. In his early days as Labour leader, he boasted in an interview with me about how he was changing his party, even in traditional Labour areas like the northwest of England.
The critical thing that has happened is that the whole structure and culture of the party has changed. You look at these delegates that are coming, indeed from places like the northwest. You look at these delegates. They're different, they're young, they go ahead, they've got energy, they've got ideas. This is not the Labour Party living in the past, it's the Labour Party addressing the future.
The Blair gamble back in the 1990s was we can move Labour aggressively to the centre ground, focus on the middle class voter and put together a coalition of partisan, tribal, traditional Labour voters and middle-class swing voters who just want good management, good government, because the first group, the partisan, tribal Labour voters, haven't got anywhere else to go. So we can hold on to them even if we don't particularly cater to what they're asking for, don't particularly give them a very prominent role. And that's the bill that's come due now, because now the Labour Party is turning around to these voters and saying, you need to stay loyal with us in these difficult times, and they're saying, well, why should we?
Labour is trying hard to unite its disparate tribes by focusing on what they mostly agree on the economy and on public services. But since Theresa May is working equally hard to try to define this election as about Brexit and about leadership, this is a far from certain strategy.
David Grossman there. Well, Labour's not the only party having to walk a Brexit tightrope. Lib Dems are looking for a revival fuelled by Remainers, but many of their former heartlands were solidly Brexit voting last year. Well, will they welcome back the yellow ribbon, or have they moved on? James Clayton went to test the waters of the southwest.
Tranquil, historic, generally all-round lovely Bath, the setting of a Lib Dem massacre in 2015. What happened here shocked even the most pessimistic of Lib Dems. They lost nearly 1 in 2 of their voters here, letting the Tories in with a 33% swing. It was a result that was mirrored in much of the southwest. But now, revenge. Theresa May's announcement yesterday is a chance for the Lib Dems to retake what they believe is their territory. Shortly after Theresa May's announcement, I went to the local party's war room. They claim to have already had 23 new members since the Prime Minister's broadcast.
OK, fantastic. I'll give you a call in the next couple of days.
So who was that?
That was someone who is looking to get involved in the Liberal Democrats. Just a spontaneous phone call, which we've been fielding all day. Well, I've been fielding all day.
So to be fair, when you said that you're getting lots of phone calls, we've been here for what, 3 or 4 minutes?
Yeah.
And you've just got another phone call, another volunteer.
Yeah.
That's quite impressive, really.
Yes.
This is Operation Phoenix, and these are its foot soldiers. What's your big strategy for winning this election, or can you not say? The Operation Phoenix.
The whole Brexit issue is getting people politically motivated that weren't previously in political parties. I mean, until 6 months ago, I hadn't joined a political party ever in my life, and it was Theresa May's speech about citizens of the world being citizens of nowhere that actually prompted me to go out that very day and join the Liberal Democrats.
This is a fantastic chance for the Lib Dems, because the Lib Dems are one of the few parties who are actually on a pro-EU platform. And there are so many people now who are leaving other parties because they're so depressed, demoralised.
Depressed and demoralised may be, but in some areas Brexit gives the Lib Dems an opportunity. Liberal Democrats reckon they've got a pretty good chance of taking southwestern seats like this one here in Bath. And one of the reasons for that is because Bath voted staunchly Remain last year. Now the problem with that is that most southwestern seats that they want to take off the Tories, well, they voted out. Just down the road is the constituency of Wells. It's one of a glut of more traditional rural seats that the Liberal Democrats lost to the Conservatives in 2015, and it poses a problem for Operation Phoenix. If you look at the referendum results, 69% of people in Bath voted to Remain, but unfortunately for the Lib Dems, that's not replicated across the southwest. Places like Taunton Dean, Yeovil and here in Wells voted out. So if the Liberal Democrats think that they can use this election as a second referendum on Brexit, well, the southwest might not be particularly fruitful for them. So you've never voted Conservative before?
Never. I was Liberal Democrat, and I'm only voting no because of the situation we're in, to make sure she gets in and gets through with Brexit, because I voted for Brexit.
So you voted Liberal Democrats
Absolutely.
In 2015?
Yes.
And now you're going to vote Conservative
Yes.
in 2017?
Yes.
I voted Conservative at the last election, but I was Lib Dem before that. And I object to being told that I'm an idiot and I don't know my own mind and I cannot understand an argument one way or the other. The EU referendum has reset the political landscape for the Lib Dems. It may well be that their best chance of gains are in the more affluent areas of southern England, which includes Bath, rather than the rump of Eurosceptic southwest. Back in Bath, I caught up with the president of the local Conservative Association.
I voted to Remain, but that is no longer an option. We have moved on. Now is the time for strong
Well,
government.
there's only one party who says they're going to reverse that, and that's the Liberal Democrats, not the Conservative Party.
Well, I mean, that's quite a staggering thought. I don't know how you reverse Article 50. I don't think there's an Article 51A. It won't work.
But have you spoken to people who voted Remain? A lot of them, they don't really care about the intricacies. They just want to vote for a party that reflects their views on Europe.
They may want that, but it's no longer on the table.
By calling this election, Theresa May senses a countrywide opportunity to take seats off Labour and win a sizable majority. But that calculation only works if she can hold Lib Dem-facing seats in the south. Bath may well be the yardstick by which the PM's decision to go to the polls will be judged.
James Clayton there. Well, the former Lib Dem leader and Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg is with me now. And that's the tricky bit, isn't it, Nick Clegg? The women in that piece we just heard saying they love Brexit, they might have been Lib Dems. Now, if they hear you talking about the EU or campaigning on that at all, they will think that they're not your people anymore.
Well, we'll see over the next 7 weeks. I think the thing about Brexit is it's not just really about whether you voted this way or that way last June. It's become the kind of vortex, the prism, through which everything else is now refracted in British politics.
So do you not talk about that?
Well, I'll give you an example. Those two ladies, I don't know them obviously, but I suspect they'll be pretty concerned that under this Conservative government there is a funding crisis in the NHS, there is a terrible crisis in social care which is not being addressed, and there are huge swinging cuts to the school system. And I think one of the things we will be explaining to them is, look, whatever you voted in the Brexit referendum, having such a Brexit-obsessed government means that they're not doing their day job. They're not providing the decent public services that people want. And that is part of the problem.
Does that mean in terms of the way you campaign, then, that you will not be, as it were, banging on about Europe? You won't particularly mention Brexit.
I bang on about Europe at the drop of a hat and will continue to do so.
Even in the southwest, even in the Brexit voting areas.
You can't hide from people the fact that this general election has been triggered by the Prime Minister for very cynical, opportunistic reasons to obviously capitalise on the weakness of her principal opponent, Jeremy Corbyn, but also to frankly get an election in and to try and hoover up a landslide majority before the bad news of Brexit comes.
Let's talk about the hoovering.
So whatever people choose to talk about, Brexit will be the dominant theme. You can't hide away from that. But the idea that you can't talk about the way that Brexit, ironically enough, means that the oxygen is being sucked away from other things that people passionately care about, schools, hospitals, social care and so on.
All right.
I think all of these things are linked and all of these things should be discussed.
Do you think you can repair the damage that was done to you or that you did to yourselves last time round?
Look, don't ask me, I'm not objective about it. I think it's a nonsense, this idea that the coalition is the ball and chain around our... I meet countless people who actually now say...
I'm not talking about the coalition, I'm talking about the fact you lost a lot of seats. Do you think you can win them back?
Oh, I think we could do a lot better. We can't do much worse than we did in the last election.
You can double it?
I'm not a sophologist. I'm not a soothsayer. I'm a politician.
You don't have to be a sophologist to say we can get from 8 to 16.
I think we will do far, far better than last time. I also happen to think we will... I perfectly suspect, it's just an instinct, that we will also do better than people expect right now. Why? Because there is a great big gap in this election campaign.
Come on, give us a ballpark. 30,
I'm
40...
simply not going to get into numbers. No, because what's the point? Look, it's not a game of bingo.
Yeah, but you've got all these MPs. You've got Testament, you've got Simon Hughes, you've got Vince Cable, you've got Ed David. They're all waiting in the wings to come back.
And I hope they'll all win, and I'm sure they will.
Right, so what are you thinking then? 20, 30 seats?
The problem is, I don't think it's sort of interesting to your viewers about what number I pluck out of thin air. That's not the issue. The issue is...
Your expectations of this
My expectations are that we will do clearly much better than we did last time. We can't do much worse. But more than that, we will, hopefully, with a sizable parliamentary party, provide the effective lead the opposition against this self-harming, damaging hard Brexit, which Theresa May wants to garner a landslide majority to impose upon us.
And if that rump is sizable enough, could it go into government again? Could you work with Labour?
No, there is absolutely no prospect, no realistic prospect of Jeremy Corbyn becoming Prime Minister.
Are you ruling it out?
Look, it's just not going to happen. So whether I rule it out or not is irrelevant. It's just not going to happen. Look, can I surprise you? Let me be very candid with you. I think we should be very plain speaking in this campaign because I think most people know what's going to happen at the end of this process, which is that Theresa May will be Prime Minister on June the 9th. I actually think that most people realise that there's almost a foregone conclusion that the Conservatives will remain the party of government. The question then becomes, what kind of majority do they have? What kind of mandate do they claim? What do they then do for the next 5 years? Do they then expect, which is what they seem to expect, that opposition should be extinguished and they can impose...
I understand. You see yourself as
therefore, whilst
opposition.
the question... No, and that's, therefore, back to your question, whilst when I was a leader back in 2010, the key test for the Liberal Democrats was how could we step up to the plate to provide responsible government?
But that might happen again.
No, the key test now is quite different. It's how we provide effective opposition. Because Labour...
But Tim Farron has said it would not be inconceivable, for example, to work with the Conservatives. Would you back him on that?
There is no way. You get Tim onto the programme and ask, he's the leader, I'm not, but there's absolutely no way that the Liberal Democrats are either going to install Jeremy Corbyn as Prime Minister of this country. I don't think the British people are going to do that anyway, nor are we going to sustain Theresa May in power to inflict on the country a self-harming, economically speaking, self-harming hard Brexit, which no one voted for last year. But so the question
we haven't got
is,
very much time. I just want to move.
Opposition is not something to be dismissed. Much though I enjoyed my time in government and felt we did a good job, I also actually value, it's one of the reasons I'm standing as a candidate, I value the importance of an effective opposition in a healthy democracy. We don't have that at the moment because Labour has collapsed.
That's
why we need a bigger Lib Dem
party. Now. And this is about Tim Farron. He got himself into a bit of hot water defining where liberal beliefs and Christian beliefs coincide. And yes, he said homosexuality is not a sin, but is he allowed to be a Christian thinker and a liberal? Because at the moment it seems that he's being put on the spot and being told to choose between his Christian beliefs, or what he thinks of homosexuality, and the privacy of his mind, and his position as the Lib Dem leader.
I think you've said it. It's the privacy of his faith, which he should be able to hold and hold dearly in the private way that many people hold faith to themselves, or indeed don't at all. What he does as a legislator and as a politician, that is a legitimate...
But he wasn't really able to say that, so he had to come out today and say...
I'm just saying to you that my view about how politicians' faith affects their public duties, you should judge them not by what their private faith is, but what their public actions are as legislators. And as you know, he voted time and time again, alongside all other Liberal Democrats, in favour of anti-discrimination measures, in favour of equal marriage and so on. So I judge him surely by his actions as an MP, not by the, I think, somewhat sort of sanctimonious judgments about his own private faith. His own private faith is his. Let him have that. Let him have that freedom, that privacy of faith, but then also judge him by his actions as a legislator, which are clearly impeccably liberal ones.
Parting thought for George Osborne as he steps down, the man who, you might say, masterminded your decapitation.
Oh, do I have a parting thought for him? Well, good luck to him. I mean, good luck to him. I think, do you know what? I think it's quite telling that, however much I staunchly disagree with George Osborne over many years, he is a particular conservative. He has quite a metropolitan turn of mind. He believes in globalisation. He believes in a sort of slightly more cosmopolitan view of the world. If the Conservative Party can't retain people like that, and whatever you think, like or dislike George Osborne, he's a formidable figure in the Conservative Party. If the Conservative Party can't keep people like that, the danger is it becomes ever more narrow and sect-like as a party, not a broad church, and that won't serve the Conservative Party well in the long run.
Nick Clegg, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that's all we have time for tonight, but Kirsty is back here tomorrow from all of us here. Good night.
Hello. Let's see what the weather's got in store for the rest of the week. And if anything, it's going to turn